Imagine you take your car to a mechanic because it's making this just awful grinding noise.
Oh, like that terrible metal on metal sound.
Yeah, exactly. So you hand over the keys, right? The mechanic lifts the hood, shines a flashlight around for like 2 seconds, and says, "Yep, your engine sounds weird. The whole combustion system is extremely dysfunctional."
Okay, well, thanks for nothing.
Right. And then they hand you a bill for $500, put their tools away, and just walk off.
I mean, you demand your money back immediately. They accurately described your pain, sure, but they didn't actually fix a single thing.
You'd be absolutely furious. I mean, they never picked up a wrench. They never even named the broken part.
Yeah, that's not a mechanic, that's just an observer.
Exactly. But what is completely wild to me is that we as a society accept this exact same scenario every single day when it comes to the institutions that govern our lives.
Oh, without a doubt, we see it all the time.
We constantly watch these massive government reforms or, corporate restructurings or new community initiatives get highly publicized. They consume millions of dollars, and then
They end up doing absolutely nothing.
nothing, zero. We are basically paying the mechanic just to hear that the engine is broken.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
It really is. So today's deep dive is about changing that dynamic. We are pulling from this deeply insightful essay called Constructive Diagnosis by Elias Kunis.
It's such a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the mission here today is to equip you with what is basically an engineering discipline for institutional design.
Right, taking the guesswork out of it.
Exactly. We are going to learn how to spot fake solutions and really understand the precise blueprint required to actually fix a broken system.
And Kunis makes this great point right off the bat. He argues that most of what we call diagnosis in the public sphere, it hasn't actually finished doing its job.
Right. We mistake motion for progress.
Yes. We mistake noise for engineering. So before we can learn how to fix things, we really have to look at the 3 sterile forms of diagnosis that trap us.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's the first one?
The first one is the sterile pundit. Think of, the loudest voice on the news or in your social media feed, just yelling, "The system is broken, polarization has won, trust is gone."
Oh, we hear that every single day.
All the time. And the issue isn't that they're wrong about trust being gone, necessarily.
Right. They might be identifying a real symptom.
Exactly. The issue is that yelling about it just produces noise, or what Kunis calls salience.
Salience, just making something super visible.
Right. Making a problem highly visible feels like you're doing something, but it produces absolutely no repair because it doesn't name a single missing part.
Yeah, pointing at a burning building is not the same thing as, like, drawing a blueprint for a fire extinguisher.
That's a perfect way to put it. Which leads to the second trap, the sterile think tank.
Oh, I know these guys. The ones with the giant PDFs.
Yes. The organization that writes a massive 200-page report. And look, they identify a real failure and they do rigorous research, but they stop right before designing a targeted structural intervention.
It's always in the last chapter, right? The recommendations.
Always. The recommendations at the end of these reports are notoriously vague. They say things like, we need stronger oversight, or we need better coordination across departments.
I see this constantly at work. You read this huge report, and the conclusion is basically everyone should just talk to each other more.
Yeah, communicate better. But recommending better coordination leaves what Kunis calls the repair space completely infinite.
Wait, what does he mean by infinite repair space?
It means you could implement 1,000 different changes under the banner of better coordination. I mean, you could set up a Slack channel. You could force everyone into a miserable weekly stand-up meeting.
Please, no. Not another stand-up meeting.
Right, or you could hire a liaison. But most of those won't address the actual failure. A diagnosis is entirely useless until it dramatically narrows that repair space.
That makes a lot of sense. It has to force a specific action.
Exactly. A diagnosis has to constrain the shape of the solution. Simply stating that a problem exists doesn't do that.
And I'm guessing that failure to constrain leads to the third trap.
You guessed it. And this one completely dominates the corporate world. It's the sterile consultant.
Oh boy, the slide decks.
The endless slide decks. This approach produces dashboards, key performance indicators, stakeholder workshops, implementation roadmaps.
And Kunis calls this action-shaped theater, right?
Yes, action-shaped theater.
That is such a devastatingly accurate phrase. I mean, action-shaped theater. It's perpetual motion without a diagnostic backbone.
Exactly. You bring in a consultant, and instead of finding the structural break in your specific company, they just import whatever generic solution they sold to their last client.
It's just a substitution.
It really is.
So if you see a massive reform announced, whether in government or at your job, and it doesn't have a rigid diagnostic backbone, you can just guarantee it will produce more reports and more meetings.
Yeah, but it won't produce change.
Okay, so we have to move past salience, past analysis, and past action-shaped theater. If those are fake, what does real engineering look like?
Real engineering in governance requires a strict blueprint. And Kunis calls this the repair specification.
The repair specification, okay.
Right. It consists of 6 highly specific fields that must be filled out before any action is taken.
6 fields. So rather than just listing them abstractly, let's look at how they work in reality. Because when applied correctly, these build institutions that survive for decades, right?
Absolutely.
So let's look at a historical masterclass in this. The creation of the CBO.
Ah, the Congressional Budget Office. Great example.
Yeah, so this takes us back to the 1973 to 1974 impoundment crisis. Basically, President Nixon was impounding or, withholding funds that Congress had already legally appropriated.
He was basically refusing to spend the money Congress told him to spend.
Exactly. So if we apply Kunis's blueprint here, the first step is identifying the failure mechanism.
Right, the specific loop or asymmetry generating the harm.
Yeah, so we aren't just saying Nixon is being difficult. The actual mechanism was an information asymmetry. The executive branch, specifically the Office of Management and Budget, they had an army of accountants and all the authoritative fiscal numbers.
And Congress.
Congress only had ad hoc committee staff. They were totally outgunned.
Right. So in a fight over the budget, the executive branch's narrative always won because they literally owned the math.
Exactly. Congress was structurally incapable of contesting the fiscal narrative on shared evidence.
So naming that specific asymmetry dictates the shape of the repair, which brings us to the second field, the missing primitive.
Missing primitive. What exactly is a primitive in this context?
A primitive is a nameable institutional capability that, if added, interrupts a failure mechanism.
Okay, so it's the specific tool that stops the bleeding.
Right. In this case, the missing primitive was a permanent source of objective budget information.
Got it. Which leads right into the third and fourth fields, the owner and the trigger.
Exactly. Who holds this new capability and what forces them to use it?
Well, the owner of this new objective data had to be a permanent body located strictly inside Congress, not the White House.
Right. Otherwise, the executive branch just controls it again.
Exactly. And the trigger was the annual budget cycle. Because, without a strict trigger condition that forces the owner to act, the primitive is just giving advisory suggestions, right?
It's just a suggestion box at that point. But the CBO was built on that exact specification. And what's fascinating here is the fifth field, the wrong repair warning.
This is my favorite part of the framework.
It's so smart. You have to anticipate the tempting, easy intervention that would actually preserve the failure, and you have to rule it out in advance.
So during the impoundment crisis, the tempting wrong repair would have been for Congress to just demand more transparency from the executive branch.
Or to set up some highly partisan encounter shop to just yell back at the president.
Right, and both of those would have left the core structural asymmetry entirely intact. The White House would still own the real math.
Precisely. By building the CBO, they completely shifted the balance of power. Which brings us to the final field, the movement test.
A specific, observable behavior proving the system actually moved.
Yes. And for the CBO, the movement test was immediate. Suddenly, Congress could score legislation and publicly contest executive claims on equal analytical ground.
And the CBO has survived for half a century because that structural diagnosis was flawless. It just works.
It really does. But, the CBO shows us how to build capacity. Sometimes a repair specification requires deliberately removing power.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. Kunis highlights the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, as an example of identifying a deeply ingrained, almost invisible failure mechanism.
Right. The mechanism here is a recursive capture loop.
A recursive capture loop, exactly.
So for those who don't know, a recursive capture loop happens when a transportation operator, like, say, an airline or a rail company, is tasked with investigating its own catastrophic failures.
Which is a terrible idea.
It's a horrible idea. Because when you investigate yourself, there is this massive structural pressure to protect your own status and limit your liability.
Actually, you inherently push the findings in a direction that protects the company.
Right.
And the capture isn't necessarily a malicious conspiracy, right? It's just structural gravity. If the investigator is accountable to the operator, the investigation is compromised.
So, following the blueprint, The missing primitive is an investigative authority completely insulated from the consequences of the investigation.
Yes. The owner had to be an independent body. And the trigger is any major transportation incident. A crash happens, they go.
Now, here's the part of the NTSB design that initially seems completely backwards. The repair boundary for the NTSB is that it has no enforcement power.
None at all.
They can subpoena documents, they can investigate a crash site, but they cannot fine an airline. They cannot punish anyone. Wait, isn't taking away their power a bad thing? How do they enforce safety without teeth?
It sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. I mean, if they find a critical safety flaw in an airplane engine, but have no power to punish the manufacturer, doesn't that make them useless?
Actually, that lack of power is the core genius of the design. This is what Kunis calls constraint propagation.
Constraint propagation.
Right. Think about the wrong repair warning for the NTSB. If you gave them prosecutorial or enforcement power, you would instantly reintroduce liability pressures into the investigation.
Oh, I see.
The moment the NTSB has the power to destroy a company with fines, the airline stops treating them as investigators and starts treating them as a legal threat.
So the airlines would stop sending their engineers to help figure out why the plane crashed, and they would start sending their attack lawyers to obscure the truth.
Exactly that. The investigators would become regulators. They'd face intense blowback, legal battles, political pressure from the industry.
They would recreate the exact same recursive capture loop they were designed to escape.
Precisely. By having zero power to punish, they are free to just coldly, objectively state the mechanical truth of why a plane crashed or a train derailed.
That is amazing. And their published reports are so specific and structurally sound that the actual regulators, the ones who do have teeth, like the FAA, they cannot publicly ignore them.
Right. The airlines are forced to implement the safety recommendations because the mechanical truth is just out in the open.
So that boundary, deliberately specifying what the institution must not be allowed to do, is the only way to protect the primitive.
Exactly. So we've seen what happens when the blueprint is perfect. But let's look at a tragedy where a reform got halfway there and then collapsed.
Yeah, what happens when a repair spec gets most things right but fails on one critical field?
Well, Kunis gives a fascinating example of a system that structurally compromised itself because it missed just one field. NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act.
NEPA is a brilliant case study of a partially correct blueprint. It was essentially a 3 of 6 repair specification.
Right, they got half the fields.
Yeah. It correctly identified the failure mechanism. Government agencies were making massive infrastructure decisions in a closed loop, structurally ignoring the environmental costs of the highways or dams they were building.
And it correctly identified the missing primitive, too.
Right. A public contestable document called an Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, produced before action was taken.
And it had a clear trigger.
Yeah.
Any major federal action affecting environmental quality.
They nailed the first 3. But the fatal flaw was the owner field. NEPA assigned ownership of this environmental impact report to the lead agency that was advancing the project.
Which is just a massive conflict of interest.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That's like telling a student to grade their own final exam, right?
Yeah.
They are intrinsically conflicted.
It is structurally identical to the recursive capture loop we just discussed with transportation safety. It's the operator investigating itself.
Right. The agency wants the infrastructure project to happen. That's their mandate. But NEPA tasks that exact same agency with rigorously documenting why the project might be environmentally disastrous.
Exactly. Filling the owner blank on a form isn't enough. The owner must be completely exempt from the failure loop.
Which they weren't.
No, because NEPA assigned it to a conflicted owner, and because they completely lacked the wrong repair warning in the movement test, the system degraded predictably.
So what actually happens when a conflicted owner is forced to produce a report they don't want to produce?
Well, Kunis points out that it devolves into an ocean of compliance paperwork.
Just red tape.
Endless red tape. The system didn't demand a live, agile model of environmental consequences. Instead, the conflicted agency just optimized for defensible documentation.
The instrument became a shield for litigation defense rather than a tool for actual environmental protection.
Right. Academics call this absorption into rituals of verification. And look at the real-world data. Between 2013 and 2018, final environmental impact statements averaged over 600 pages in length.
Oh, wow. Over 600 pages.
Yeah, an average of 661 pages, and taking a median of 2.2 years to complete.
A 661-page document that takes over 2 years to write is the ultimate action-shaped theater. I mean, it just buries the actual environmental modeling under an avalanche of legalistic maneuvering.
Exactly. NEPA wasn't just a good idea that got bogged down in red tape over time. It was a structurally incomplete specification from day one.
It failed exactly along the fault lines of its missing fields.
Yes. When verification is mandated but the diagnostic constraints are weak, institutional capture always answers with rituals.
Okay, so now that we see how getting the spec wrong leads to a 600-page paperwork nightmare, how do we actually anticipate these bad fixes today?
Well, understanding the mechanics of a failure allows you to predict exactly how a system will try to wrongly repair itself. Kunis outlines an incredible modern example involving Statistics Finland in 2022.
Oh, this one is wild.
Yeah.
Because it shows how technical tweaks can create massive shockwaves if no one is holding the blueprint. So in 2022, there was this technical reclassification of state-subsidized housing loans in Finland. And overnight, a mere procedural classification change added about 6 percentage points to Finland's headline debt ratio.
Just overnight. The statisticians didn't do anything malicious. Every actor was playing their part procedurally.
Right.
But the failure mechanism here was what Kunis calls an unmediated absorption pathway.
Okay, that sounds intense. What does that mean?
That is just a highly technical way of saying that tiny classification decisions were flowing straight into massive macroeconomic effects, and there was no owner standing in the middle producing a consequence model.
Ah, so no one was assigned the job of anticipating how a simple spreadsheet update would, panic the financial markets.
Exactly. Because there was no owner for that consequence model, the system suffered a massive shock.
And this highlights the immense power of having wrong repair warnings ready for different types of failures, right?
Yes. Kunis outlines how different bad equilibria invite very predictable, very attractive bad repairs.
Give me an example.
Take a no-owner failure, which is exactly what happened with Statistics Finland. A harm is occurring, but no institution owns it. The tempting wrong repair is just to CC more people on emails.
Oh my gosh, yes. Let's keep everyone in the loop.
Right. Send the data to more inboxes, build more dashboards so everyone can see the problem. But visibility doesn't assign ownership. It just diffuses responsibility even further.
Or consider a Goodhart failure. I love this one. This is based on Goodhart's law, which states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. People just start gaming the system.
Exactly. If you measure factory productivity solely by the number of nails produced, workers will produce thousands of tiny, useless nails.
Right. So the tempting wrong repair for gaming the system is just to add more metrics. Let's measure the weight of the nails, too.
But adding more metrics just multiplies the gaming surface. You aren't fixing the mechanism. You're just giving them a more complex puzzle to solve.
So true.
And then another classic is the capacity failure. This is where an institution simply lacks the ability to do what is asked of it.
Like they don't have the budget or the staff.
Exactly. So the attractive wrong repair is punishment. You hand out fines, you censure the department, you fire the leadership to show you are taking action.
But wait, does punishing a department that lacks the budget and tools to do its job suddenly magically grant them budget and tools?
No, it just redistributes the blame. The repair must actually build the missing capacity, like Congress did when they built the CBO.
It's crazy how we gravitate toward these wrong repairs. But I guess institutions naturally default to solutions that preserve their current power structure.
They absolutely do. If you don't explicitly name the wrong repair in advance, human nature and institutional inertia will instinctively choose it.
Which means we need to be prepared.
Exactly. That is the strategic reality of institutional design. Kunis refers to the repair specification as a strategic weapon.
A strategic weapon. I like that.
Right, because political and corporate windows for change, they open suddenly, usually because of a crisis or a scandal, and they close incredibly fast.
Right. Everyone's panicking and wants a fix immediately.
Yes. And if a crisis hits, the faction that arrives in the room with a pre-compiled 6-part repair specification usually gets to build the new institution.
Because if you don't have that 6-part spec ready, if you just walk into the room and yell, the system is broken, what happens during that narrow window of panic?
You get consultants writing the spec on contract in real time.
And we know how that goes.
Yeah. The resulting design won't be shaped by an objective diagnostic of the failure mechanism. It will be shaped by whoever has the most veto power in the room at that moment.
So the Diagnostic Act has to commit to the structural shape of the repair before the political window even opens.
Exactly. Without that pre-compiled blueprint, the moment of reform is captured by the strongest faction, and you end up with action-shaped theater.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It means we have to stop settling for salience. We have to stop accepting endless reports that recommend better coordination.
We have to demand more.
Yes. When someone stands up in a meeting and says, the system is broken, do not let them stop there. Demand a repair specification.
Demand they name the specific missing primitive.
Exactly. The missing primitive, the unconflicted owner, and the specific trigger that will force action.
You know, to take this beyond government policy and corporate structures, consider how this applies to the most persistent, seemingly unsolvable conflicts in your personal or professional life.
Well, that's a great point, like everyday conflicts.
Right. Think about the next time someone at your office inevitably sighs and says, communication is really broken across our teams right now.
Which happens every week. What if you refuse to accept that vague theme as a diagnosis?
Yes. What if, instead of scheduling another useless hour-long alignment meeting that everyone will hate, you calmly force the room to name the precise missing primitive?
Right. Ask them, what is the actual mechanism causing the breakdown, and what is the wrong repair warning we need to avoid?
If we demand the discipline to map those constraints, we stop wasting energy on the illusion of progress, and we start engineering actual solutions.
Institutions default to repairs that preserve their current power. If you don't name the wrong repair in advance, human nature will choose it. Keep asking those hard questions. Keep looking for the structural loops. And whatever you do, don't pay the mechanic until they actually pick up a wrench. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.